What's good, everybody? Welcome to the NBA Strategy Show presented by SuperDraft. I'm Dave Loughran. With me, Adam Scherer. We got a 6-game slate, 5 games, depending on where you're looking today. And it's good to be back. Took a little break this weekend. I bachelor party up in the Poconos. Got my face burnt to shit, Adam, as you can see. Look at that hat burn line. You don't get much better than that. Oh, that's wicked, man.
It's great too because you're wearing a snapback, so you got it. It's not like the normal one where it's just cut off at the bottom.
Not at all. If only I had the snapback with the holes in it.
Right.
I was just roasted. I kept thinking I was out of the sun. Apparently not. But
dude, that's the worst. Like as far as burns go, like when you go to the beach and it's like 75 and cloudy and it feels great. And yeah.
And then you get out of the shower, right?
Yeah.
And then you know it's real bad. I'm assuming you get burnt probably as bad as I do.
Oh, I get burnt real bad.
Real bad, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we were out from like 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. or something.
Yeah,
like
that'll do it.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And after that, 18th beer, you forget that the sun burns you anyway. So
right.
Anyway,
and my problem is that I'm stupid too. So I'm always just like, oh, whatever. It's summer and I'll get my tan for the year. And then I'm out there burning and I'm just like drinking and then I don't care to put on sunscreen.
Yeah. A week later, you're peeling like inch thick flakes of skin off.
Yeah. I still remember my worst one was one of those cloudy days. My chest ended up peeling like 3 different times. It was like purple at one point.
Oh, yeah. I'm sure I've had sun poisoning on multiple occasions, but anyway, well worth it. Good to get away a little bit. It's secluded up there. You don't have to worry about all the same shit you have to worry about down here. So we're back, and I did my best to pay attention to everything, particularly the Philadelphia 76ers. What a trash organization that is. But anyway, we've got 6 games on FanDuel, 5 here on DraftKings. Happy to have everybody with us. How'd your weekend go, man?
Went well. Lots of sports, but I didn't have any shows or articles or anything, so it was kind of weird getting a break from this and just playing DFS the whole time.
You went down to Baltimore this weekend?
I just ran up there this morning. Wanted to just check on my apartment and drop off my rent check.
Oh, okay. All right, so let's dive right into it. By the way, 5 games on our sponsor, SuperDraft, superdraft.io, or you can download it in the App Store. There's no salaries there. It's a wonderful thing. There's multipliers. So you can play literally whoever you want. But that's not usually the way to go about it. You don't want to just play everybody that's the highest priced on DraftKings or FanDuel because it's all about getting that value with this multiplier mode. For example, if you take a look at today's slate, you're going to have somebody like Joel Embiid or Nikola Jokic or 1.15 or LeBron James at 1.1. But if you scroll down, you're going to get some value options that are around one or a full 2-point multiplier. So you're getting double whatever they score. And if you haven't checked the site out yet, you'll get $10 free just by using the promo code Awesemo10, AWESEMO 10, all one word, 10, not TEN, and depositing $10 or more, you'll get $10 free. If you want to get $20 free right into your account, deposit $100 or more. So nice little 20% boost right there, straight off the top. SuperDraft, download it in the App Store or check it out at superdraft.io. You got the $12,500 jump shot, $2,500 up top. And these are like attainable wins, right? DraftKings had massive overlay, but they had a player almost 1 million entries that were expected to be in the Millie Maker on Thursday. I think they only hit like 450 or 500, Adam. But
yeah, I think it was somewhere around there. I know FanDuel today, maybe it will, maybe it won't overlay, but they have a huge $3 tournament, especially for Monday afternoon.
Right. But in this case, you're competing. There's 1,200 entries, like legitimate possibility to win over here, and not just a shot in the dark if you're not playing 150 lineups. So check it out. Download it in the App Store. Check it out at superdraft.io. Use that promo code Awesemo10 when you sign up to get your free money directed or injected straight into your account. All right, let's kick it off with this 130 game because FanDuel's got the $500,000 clutch shot, 100K up top. Toronto at Miami. And as you can see, we've got that nice little bar over there, give you the spreads and all of that good stuff. So where are you sitting on a game with a good defensive team in Toronto, also a good offensive team in Toronto, and a good defensive and offensive team in Miami? Looking at it, you've got a 221 total, Toronto, obviously, neutral stadium, 3-point favorites, but it's hard to not think that this game stays pretty competitive given many similarities, actually, with both of these teams.
Yeah, I think it should be a competitive game, and I think the total just goes to show how little defense has actually been played down in Orlando. This is
the
a game.
The first two games on Thursday went well under, and then on Friday everything soared over by like 100 points.
Yeah, it seems like teams are playing a little bit faster, a little bit less defense. The Toronto Lakers game had some defense, especially from Toronto, but it still seems like a higher total than you would normally get between these two teams, considering how good they both are defensively. But I think that from the Toronto side, and obviously just looking at FanDuel here, but $8K on Pascal Siakam seems like a pretty good price tag. Obviously a really, really good player, and he's small forward eligible, which is nice as well. So that stands out a little bit. Kyle Lowry's coming off probably the best game Kyle Lowry's ever played in his life. He had 14 rebounds. I don't want, obviously you're not chasing that. That's not likely to happen again. But one thing that did stand out was that he was a lot more aggressive offensively. Maybe we see that continue going forward. I know it's something that prior to the break, it really frustrated me because I felt like Lowry should be better than he was from a DFS standpoint. And there were so many games where you saw him kind of defer to Fred VanVleet and let VanVleet run the offense. That wasn't happening against the Lakers. Lowry was out there running the show. So maybe that's kind of a mindset thing. You see him be a little bit more aggressive going forward.
Do you expect Nick Nurse to continue running these guys for monster minutes like we saw earlier in the year? Because against the Lakers last time out with Toronto, you saw the bench emptied for the final minute and a half. So whatever the starters played, you could probably add, outside of Marc Gasol, you could probably add another minute and a half. So, for example, Pascal Siakam played 37 minutes. He'd have been creeping up on 39. OG Anunoby would have been creeping up on 35 or more. Fred VanVleet played 40. And all of these guys, including Kyle Lowry, who played 35, they were all yanked with a minute and a half left in a game that they were leading by, I think, 17 or 18 points. So I guess that's one thing we have to look at here when we're talking about games that many are, I don't want to use the word meaningless, but not necessarily as meaningful as they would be earlier in the season. Now, for some teams, that's entirely different. For a team like the Toronto Raptors, it was good to see that Nick Nurse was happy to run them out for close to 40 minutes like we saw before the postponement of the season.
Yeah, definitely good to see. And, I think to your point, the Raptors are probably one of the teams where if they are looking to start sort of scaling back minutes, they're in one of the better positions to do so because they're not catching Milwaukee and it will be really tough for Boston to catch them. So their seeding is more or less locked in. But until we start seeing it, I'm not going to assume it happens. I mean, you saw these guys playing huge minutes during the regular season. Kyle Lowry, I believe, is third in the league in minutes per game. And then, like you said, monster minutes again against the Lakers. So until we see a game where Nurse clearly takes his foot off the pedal, I'm going to assume that you're just getting huge minutes from these starters.
You talk about the deferring to Fred VanVleet when it comes to Kyle Lowry. And yeah, that had been an issue. VanVleet, however, on FanDuel is $6,600. So where you've got Lowry at $8,300, you have a $1,700 discount on VanVleet. Do we have to consider that while he's not as productive, or at least usually not as productive on a permanent basis as Kyle Lowry, the fact that he could be playing upwards of 40 minutes again today in a game with a 3-point spread puts him in the conversation?
Yeah, for sure. Especially, he's so much cheaper and he's a productive per minute player. He's playing big minutes and he's out there when Lowry's not. Nurse was staggering their minutes against the Lakers, as you would expect. So you do get, even if Lowry is more assertive for whatever reason going forward than he had been before, you're still getting a nice chunk of minutes for Fred VanVleet without Lowry on the floor. So I think that he's still a really good value just based on how many minutes he plays and the fact that he can, give you 0.9 to 1 fantasy points per minute.
The one good thing about Nick Nurse's rotations is we have a pretty good idea of what they're going to look like. He does not like to run a deep bench whatsoever. I know Matt Thomas came in and played some minutes in the fourth quarter, and not including the blowout run that he emptied the bench with. Really, the only guys that you're going to see consistent playing time from off the bench are Norman Powell and Serge Ibaka. And then Terrence Davis will get a little bit of run as well. He runs a pretty tight rotation, which I think overall, at least allows us to know what type of minutes we're going to get. But you do have 5 other games on this slate. You have a ton of other teams to talk about. Do you see any players being priorities here for Toronto against Miami?
Looking at the small forward position on FanDuel, I think Van Vliet's one of the better options. You do have Mitchell, Drew Holiday, and then Dylan Brooks in a good matchup. But 6,600, there's nothing else really in that price range except for Donovan Mitchell against the Lakers. Everybody's either a little bit more expensive or a little bit less. So I think I get to a lot of Van Vliet.
Okay. Yeah, Siakam's 8K flat. Serge Ibaka 5,200, but it sure seems like him and Gasol are going to cannibalize each other's production for the most part. Even $4,300 Marc Gasol, you might have had some interest in that, but I can't do it. His per minute production's been down before all of this happened, and now it looks like his minutes are going to be somewhat tempered. So I'm getting away from that. Van Vliet's definitely the guy that I look to the most here at 6,600.
I think Siakam. Go ahead. My interest in Siakam also, and I doubt we'll have the news, but my interest in Siakam is also somewhat dependent on Malcolm Brogdon because TJ Warren gets a bump without Sabonis, but if Brogdon's out, he gets an even bigger bump. So if Brogdon were out, I would like Warren more than Siakam, but if Brogdon's in, then I think Siakam looks like a little bit better small forward play.
Okay. Yeah, and the small forward's not terrible on FanDuel. I can't wait to talk about what TJ Warren's ownership is going to look like against the Washington Wizards. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's nothing there. But coming off a 53-point performance, there's going to be a lot to get into. On the Miami side, though, where do we stand here? The usual suspects. You're talking about Bam Adebayo, power forward eligible, by the way. And I'm not. Have you seen any word on whether or not he's going to play? I've seen that he's probable, so I think we're good on that front. But
yeah, I mean, if he's, it sounds like he's probably going to play.
Yeah, so that's what I'm assuming. Do you like anything from Miami?
I mean, I always like Bam. The problem you're going to run into is that there's a lot of value at power forward. And so I think that's going to be a position where you're going to want to save some money. There's a bunch of guys that you can take shots at, 3 of them from Denver, but then also Jaren Jackson Jr. is cheap, Brandon Clark is cheap, and then you have Davis at the top. So I think it's just kind of a stacked position value-wise, which maybe makes Bam a little bit lower owned in tournaments. But as far as, optimal plays, it's going to be tough, I think, to get to him. Jimmy Butler is tough as well for kind of the same reasons. On its face, he's a good play at 8,200. He's not overpriced. You should expect big minutes from him, and obviously the offense runs through him. But you have a lot of high upside shooting guards that are a lot less expensive. So I don't think in an optimal build, either one is necessarily a priority. But in tournaments, I think they're both such high upside guys that should probably come in at a little bit lower ownership than they otherwise would because of the pricing of other players.
I know it's nice to have an additional game included on FanDuel, get it up to 6, but this is not a game overall that I see many priority spots from.
Yeah, and one thing to keep in mind too, from a roster, just from a lineup building standpoint, is that with the games all spread out, when you have an early island game like this, and you're probably going to get a ton of news before the 4:00 games, there's an advantage. There's already an advantage because of late swap and people not using it correctly. But the more spots you have open in your lineup to take advantage of late news, the bigger your edge is going to be.
Yeah, and it would be a lot different. It would be a lot different if this was like a Washington Wizards game, a exceedingly fast-paced spot. That would make things way different, but I don't see that being the case. So.
Right. It's kind of just it's kind of like a tiebreaker where some of these guys are good but not great plays, but then it knocks them down a little bit when you factor in that you're losing your late swap advantage by using a roster spot on this game.
Yeah. Okay. Hey, Sean just said he dropped a super chat. Sean, if I missed it, I apologize because I didn't see it. But I trust you, and I appreciate that, man. Thanks for all the support from all of you guys hanging out with us every day. Let's move on to the DraftKings slate here, and, FanDuel as well. First game you've got on DraftKings and on SuperDraft is a number of 4 p.m. games, right? Denver, OKC, and then you've got Indy and Washington. So if you have that, then you have a 6:30, an 8, and a 9. So we're pretty spread out. We'll start with the Nuggets against the Thunder. So Nikola Jokic is one of the highest price spots. Let's start with the Nuggets here. So you have Nikola Jokic, $9,400 on DraftKings. Let's start with him. Over on FanDuel, he's weighing in at $8,900. He is going to come in at a considerable discount from Joel Embiid, which I think is going to be one of the spots we'll talk about, whether we want to get to Jokic or Embiid, or maybe we'll want to get to both because there aren't a ton of high-priced options on this slate. But yeah, Jokic in his return, the Denver Nuggets have played only one game. That was against Miami. He got 34 minutes and was good. You know, he 7 rebounds, 6 assists, dropped 19 points. Nothing spectacular. Usage was around where it's been on the season.
Looked like he was going to break the slate open early and then did nothing in the second half.
Yeah. Okay. So is this a spot where you look to get back to Jokic against the OKC Thunder and a pretty good defensive center in Steven Adams?
It's a spot where I'm going to be very aware of ownership because what we saw happen. So Jamal Murray's questionable for this game. Gary Harris and Will Barton are out. If Murray is in, it does take some usage away from Jokic. But if he's out, then it's more playmaking responsibilities for Jokic. It's more usage. What you want to be cautious of or aware of, though, is that there's likely to be a surge in ownership that isn't necessarily proportional to the increase in production that we should expect from Jokic. He's played 11 games without Murray this year. He's averaged 1.5 DraftKings points per minute, which obviously is really good, but it's not that much higher than he normally produces. And what we saw happen in their last game was that, I know in DraftKings tournaments, Jokic was around 50% owned, especially at some of the higher stake stuff, whereas Embiid was down around 25, 30%. So I think that between those two, obviously the ceilings are really high on both. If the ownership surges on Jokic, I like going to Embiid. Jokic is a little bit cheaper on FanDuel at 8,900. Tough matchup, like you said. One positive that stood out from the last game was you mentioned the 34 minutes. He also lost 3.5 minutes to the blowout. So someone that we had seen during the regular season kind of struggle to play more than 32, 33 minutes got massive minutes against Miami. So, I do really, really like Jokic here. I like him more, obviously, if Murray's out. But do pay attention to what happens to the ownership once we get Jamal Murray news.
Yeah, and it's an interesting spot to try and evaluate because you mentioned Barton and Harris being out. Both of them didn't play in the first game either. So we got to get some idea of what Mike Malone was going to do with both of them out. Let's take a look at the rotation here because this could tell us a lot. Monte Morris, and add, maybe not necessarily, but add, would you say 3.5 minutes? I think it was.
Jokic played 34.1, but he got pulled with 3.5 to go. Yeah,
so did Millsap, Jeremy Grant, Monte Morris, all around that mark. But Monte Morris got 28 minutes here. He was looking to go
too.
What?
He lost some playing time to foul trouble in the first half too.
Yeah, so you've got foul trouble with, what did he have? 2 foul, or he's third foul. No, he only picked up. Oh, you're right. He picked up his third early in the second quarter. You're right.
Yeah. Yeah, because he had actually subbed back in earlier than normal because PJ Dozier was in foul trouble, and then Morris promptly got in foul trouble.
Right. Okay. So yeah, he was pacing easy over 30 minutes, which is encouraging. Maybe Malone gave him more minutes in the fourth quarter due to foul trouble earlier. That's possible, but I think you could give him around 30 minutes today. I guess all of this comes down to what happens with Jamal Murray, though, because if you have Jamal Murray, Gary Harris, and Barton out, 2 of which are already out, then the only guys that you can really then you're talking about value on a number of different levels, starting with Morris. Michael Porter Jr. played 25 minutes. I don't know if he would have played more. Torrey Craig was in there for almost 30 minutes. Jeremy Grant pulling 26 minutes off the bench. This team becomes very, very interesting depending on what happens with Barton. And fortunately, Adam, it's the earliest game on this DraftKings and SuperDraft slate.
Yeah, it's also pretty different between DraftKings and FanDuel. When you look at the pricing, DraftKings priced everyone up after their last game. You have Monte Morris up to $5,000. He was $3,500 last game, and I kind of thought he was a tournament fade even then. I think I came in around the field on DraftKings. But he's someone that, the minutes will be there, and he's somewhat productive, but he's clearly not going to get that much usage playing with Nikola Jokic and Paul Millsap on that that first unit. So he's someone that I think tends to be a little bit over-owned when Murray's out, but the price tag on DraftKings makes it so it's even tougher to get there. Whereas on FanDuel, he's $4,000. So a really good value there. And then the same goes for Torrey Craig, who was $3K minimum last game, and I think about 15% owned on DraftKings. Now he's 4,500. You had Michael Porter go from 3K to 4,500. So they're not close to the same values that they were in their last game.
Right, and that's the issue here. Certain guys can be very good options, and then their price comes up. You feel like you still have to play them.
Porter scares me here too, because he's obviously a talented offensive player. He gives you a lot of upside because he'll go out and shoot and he can score, but he's an absolute liability defensively. And then now you're talking about this OKC team that plays so many minutes where they have, they have three guards out there, or you have a high usage guy in Gallinari. I think that there's at least some added risk in this matchup that Mike Malone just sits Porter on the bench because he can't stand watching him play defense.
It's very possible. Jamal Murray, by the way, is considered very questionable. Not questionable, but very questionable. So I don't know.
Yeah, I don't remember what coach it was before the first game. Like he called someone probably questionable, and then the next day he said he's definitely questionable.
I don't know what any of it means anymore, to be honest with you. I just know that Denver is going to be one of those teams that's going to make a pretty big impact, depending on which way you decide to go with them.
Denver and Indiana, both two reasons why I think you should be kind of knocking down those Toronto and Miami guys a little bit.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's possible that the players from Toronto and Miami both come out with big games. There's no doubt about that. But is it necessary to load your lineup with a number of those guys when you're waiting on big news in each of the 4 p.m. games? Like, right. It's not like we're waiting on news in the 9 p.m. game and 8 p.m. game, where you have to roster other players. You don't have to get guys in from Miami and Toronto. And that isn't to say you should actively avoid it. Like if you're crunching lineups and you're getting some with those guys, you're not necessarily going to throw all of them out of there. But having a limited amount certainly seems like the way to go here. Who, as it stands right now, would be your top options from the Denver side, knowing what we know? Let's assume Jamal Murray doesn't play.
Jokic would be the top guy just because he's cheap, at 8,900 on FanDuel and 94 on DraftKings. I'd have some interest in Millsap too. He did play 28.5 minutes and lost some playing time, as you said. Jeremy Grant played a lot of minutes alongside Millsap, which is a change from what we were seeing earlier in the season. That's obviously as a result of Harris and Barton being out. But earlier in the season, you were just basically seeing 48 minutes split between Millsap and Grant. So it made it really hard to project Millsap for more than around 26 minutes. I think you can do so now because of the fact they're playing alongside each other and the fact that Michael Porter is a defensive liability. So I think there's a good chance that you see a lot of lineups with Grant at the 3, Millsap at the 4. So I think Millsap's salary looks really appealing. And then Michael Porter is cheap enough where he could certainly have a good game, but I'm just really not confident in him getting more than like 24 to 26 minutes.
And I can't help but wonder, after what we saw in these tune-up games, if Mike Malone's going to start doing some weird stuff with rotations.
I think that it's just a matter of go ahead.
I was just going to say, if a guy like Murray is out, and they get off to a bad start, is Malone the type of guy that's willing to tweak things that are a little bit unorthodox? I would think yes.
I think it's just a matter of time before we see Bol start stealing minutes from someone.
Yeah.
I don't really know who. I thought Malone ran that really weird like jumbo lineup in the scrimmage games, and I joked that you would never see Bol actually playing the 3. We got a few minutes of Jokic, Plumlee, and Bol on the floor together against Miami. So I think that you're right. And it's another thing that just makes me really concerned about Michael Porter because of his defense. Malone's not going to hesitate to just run some weird lineups out there if he doesn't want to watch Michael Porter try and get roasted defensively.
And Michael Porter becomes your first casualty in a Mike Malone coach team. We all know that. If you go on Nuggets Twitter, and I think if you're a Nuggets fan watching the show, you would agree that Nuggets fans have been very frustrated with how Malone has used Michael Porter Jr. this season. Pissed off that he's not getting more than 15 minutes a game when everybody's healthy. There's all of this, there's all of this contention surrounding that. I think you could be very right here that he doesn't end up getting that run. He's $4,100 on FanDuel and $4,500 on DraftKings, What do you expect ownership to come in at here on him?
I'm not really sure. If he'd had a good game in their first game, I would expect it to be really high. Looking at my baseline projections, he looks good for the salary. So I do think he'll get plenty of ownership. I think it might be tempered a little bit because he sort of burned people in that game. But, I think when you have Millsap at a similar price point, for example, I think I'd rather go to Millsap.
Okay. Anything else on Denver?
I don't think so.
All right. Let's keep it moving here. Talking OKC Thunder. A decent amount of injuries scattered around the league today, and fortunately, none of them COVID related, at least as far as I'm concerned, or as far as I know. But OKC looking healthy. They're in what was it? The first game here, because they played only once as well. They came in and just routed Utah. Chris Paul had a solid enough game, but only played 27 minutes. Another one, when we're talking about blowouts, you have to be cognizant of what type of minutes are being lost and gained because of that. In this one specifically, you saw Chris Paul come out. Actually, I don't think Chris Paul played. He played 3.5 minutes in the fourth quarter and never came back. At that point, they were up by like 27 points or something insane. So I'd say be a little bit careful about what I wouldn't project minutes for guys like him based on what we saw in their opening night.
Yeah, there was a lot of weird stuff looking on Popcorn Machine for this game. You mentioned Paul. So Paul and Adams both lost their final rotation of the fourth quarter. They both play from the end of the third into the fourth. They got that, but then they both never came back in. Gallinari didn't step on the floor in the fourth quarter, and Dennis Schroeder had 3 fouls in the first half, so he lost a bunch of minutes in the second quarter. So the minutes for these guys, not really indicative, I don't think, of what you would see in a competitive game. Also, keep in mind that this was a 30-point game for like the entire second half, so you potentially have rotations being cut a little bit shorter as well. I think that I'm definitely going to project their rotation to be basically what it was during the first part of the season, more so than what we saw against Utah.
Yeah, like Adams played 28 minutes. You'd expect him to return. Nerlens Noel played around 18. I don't know. I don't see any reason to disagree with you here. Why change anything up? It was a massive lead. From their biggest lead was about less than midway into the third quarter. They were up by 29 points. And the Utah Jazz never really cut back into that lead whatsoever. They ended up losing by 16 points. So I think you're right here. Let's take a look at them and talk about what we like here against Denver. Chris Paul, 7,700. Dennis Schroeder, leading sixth man of the year candidate as far as Vegas goes. He played 22 minutes in that game. Would have gotten more as well. And then like Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, 6K. Nobody's really exceedingly pricey. Danilo Gallinari at 56 on DraftKings. Steven Adams at 54. Outside of Chris Paul, they're all pretty cheap. Does that draw you towards them at all?
Yeah, I think they actually look a little bit more favorably priced on DraftKings than FanDuel. You're getting, whereas like Denver, for example, is a lot cheaper on FanDuel. You're getting Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. He jumps out at 6K. He just plays huge minutes. He even got 32 and a half minutes in that blowout. Probably gets to 36, 37 minutes if the game's competitive. He's obviously, you're kind of rolling the dice between him, Paul, and Schroeder on where the usage goes, and Gallinari in any given game. But he just plays so many minutes, and he's really cheap. So I think he stands out. And I think 5,600 on DraftKings for Gallinari is a really good salary as well. You and I have talked before that he just doesn't seem to have any sort of top end like outcomes in his range. But at 5,600, he certainly can give you a score that you're happy with at that price point. So I think they both look good. Steven Adams at 5,400. This is another matchup where you certainly expect him to be on the floor for 28 to 30 minutes going against an active center in Nikola Jokic, maybe even more if they, because Jokic is playing so many minutes. But at the very least, barring foul trouble, I'd expect 28 to 30 from Adams, who at 5,400 is a pretty good candidate to double-double.
Patrick Mahomes, thanks for the super chat. You as well, Sean Logan, putting in that work today. All in all, what's the total? What is the total on this game? Actually, I lost 228. No, I'm sorry, 218. So it's one of the lower totals on the slate. Both of these teams, from a pace standpoint, I don't expect anything crazy in the single game that they came back and played. You can't really glean anything from that based on the opponent. But like Oklahoma City played at a 98 pace, but that was against what, the Utah Jazz. The Denver Nuggets played at a 100 pace. So you're right. A lot of teams opened back this restart with very fast pace of play. But yeah, Utah Jazz and Oklahoma City Thunder Denver Nuggets and the Thunder are at the bottom of the league. I don't really know if that means much today, though, Adam, very simply because it's not a huge slate and you're getting some pretty good pricing and you're also getting a considerable amount of injuries. So that's not something I really want to consider.
Yeah, the pricing is what really stands out to me on DraftKings. On FanDuel, just not nearly as much. Obviously you can only roster one center, so that takes some value away from Adams. And everyone else just not as fair as affordably priced as they're on DraftKings.
Top plays from this game?
Schroeder and Gallo on DraftKings. Jokic on any site.
Okay, so let's move on to Indy and Washington. This one we're gonna be spending quite a bit of time on this one because who knows what's going on. Pacers against the Wizards, 7.5 point spread here. The Wizards have just looked really bad. I mentioned to you a couple weeks ago that I thought it was possible the Wizards against the Suns can cover that 7.5. They looked even worse than I thought. And much of that was because I don't have any faith in the Phoenix Suns to come out and bludgeon teams. But little did I know that the Wizards would be even worse than initially expected. But this game does have a 228.5 total. You've got... we should be expecting the pace of play to be accelerated, especially for the Washington Wizards, who I don't know how many times you and I have said it this season, but they really, really rely on just flat out running the court because defensively they're terrible. It doesn't help that they don't have Bradley Beal and they don't have Davis Bertans, but that's what they're going to have to do. I don't see any real way they get away from that. So let's dive into it with the Pacers. Arguably the best matchup of any team on this slate. Big favorites, 228 total, one of the highest implied total, might be the highest implied total of any team going today. And now you've got not only the Denver Nuggets with a bunch of injuries, but you got Malcolm Brogdon, whose status is unclear. And then you have Victor Oladipo, who last I saw with that ailing knee is doubtful to play. That could make things... That could be really, really interesting. Not to mention you got, Jeremy Lamb's been out, so you don't have him as a reinforcement. They're going to be down quite a bit of players. It'll be and Domantas Sabonis, who has been out. Dude, they could be down most of their starters tonight, and you might see, as crazy as it sounds, you might see another opportunity for T.J. Warren to just jack up 100 shots because who else is going to do it? What do you think of Warren and how do you see this shaking out from an injury perspective?
So I'm assuming I'm going under the assumption that Brogdon sits because he sat the last game and because they're playing the Wizards. So I think this is probably a spot where Indiana just tries to get a win without Brogdon. If he's out, there's obviously a ton of minutes opening up with Oladipo doubtful as well. But this season, we have 265 minutes from TJ Warren with none of Oladipo, Brogdon, or Sabonis on the floor. He has a 29.1% usage rate. He's only averaged a little over 1 fantasy point per minute. But obviously with that usage rate, you get a much higher ceiling. And he played 40 minutes in their last game. So he would look like one of the top, forward options on the slate if Brogdon's out. If Brogdon's in, he's still a good play. It's just not quite as appealing. But then you're also going to get, if Brogdon sits, a bunch of minutes for guys like Aaron Holiday. Last game, we only saw 17 minutes for TJ McConnell. He essentially was just Aaron Holiday's backup. But that was with Oladipo playing 32 minutes. Now, if you don't have Brogdon or Oladipo, I think you probably see a bit more of McConnell alongside Aaron Holiday, which would make McConnell a good value because he's a really good per minute producer. His salary did come up a little bit, but I think if Brogdon sits, that you would see a little bit more playing time there. Aaron Holiday is still cheap at $4,500 on FanDuel and $5K on DraftKings. So I think that Warren's the one that really stands out because that's where a lot of the usage should go. But then you're also going to get a lot more minutes for the guards.
And in minutes and playing time with Oladipo, Brogdon, and Sabonis off the floor, did you mention the amount of time we've seen for some of these guys?
TJ Warren's at 265 minutes. Miles Turner is at 269 minutes with a 26.5% usage rate, averaging 1.25 DraftKings points per minute. I think he's actually really interesting because on top of that, he only played 19 minutes in their first game because he was in foul trouble against Joel Embiid, which has happened every single time he's played Joel Embiid in his career, I believe. He's less likely to get in foul trouble here against the Wizards. I think that as long as he doesn't foul, he can play 32, 33 minutes in a great spot, and he's in a great position to produce. So he would be one of my favorite center plays. Beyond him, you have 445 minutes from Justin Holiday with 0.75 of a point per minute. Aaron Holiday's at 331 minutes with about a fantasy point per minute. TJ McConnell is at 398 minutes with 0.92 DraftKings points per minute.
Yeah. Did you take Lamb off too? I didn't.
No, I didn't.
Yeah, if I take Lamb off, it shouldn't make a huge difference, but it's a lot of, kind of core players. Holiday averaging north of a fantasy point per minute and almost 300 minutes there. Holiday is not doing much, but he usually doesn't. He'll get run, but per minute production, you can't expect much. Miles Turner, though, and you just kind of spoke about him at length, that is a spot where does Miles Turner often leave much to be desired? There's no doubt about it, right? As a center, he's not a particularly good rebounder, and he's a decent scorer. He's a good shot blocker. But 6,100 here against Thomas Bryant, who I've mentioned before, some of the worst, 5-man defensive efficiency rotations in the league or lineups in the league before the season ended or was postponed included Thomas Bryant. So defensively, he is not very good. Thomas Bryant's also going to play a shit ton of minutes. So Turner here is probably, I don't know, he's $6,100 on DraftKings, Adam, and forget about like Oladipo and Brogdon. We're talking just strictly from a usage standpoint. Sabonis being out, and then Batadze. If Batadze plays, I would assume he gets. How many minutes would you give him if he plays?
Batadze?
Yeah.
What? 12-ish.
12, right?
I mean, somewhere around there.
If he doesn't play, what I'm getting at, I'm not talking about playing him, but if he doesn't play, McMillan is really, really limited in the front court. So I don't know. It should be interesting. TJ Leaf played 9 minutes in that game. Turner fouled out after 20 minutes. Who was playing the bulk of the 5? Jakar Sampson?
Yeah, Jakar Sampson. Sampson played 20 minutes.
Yeah. Could you do that with Thomas Bryant at the 5? I suppose you could, but why would you want to? I think Turner is one of the better value options on this slate.
Yeah, I'm a little disappointed. I just pulled up our ownership projections, and right now, at least, we have Turner as the second highest owned guy on DraftKings. I was sort of hoping that people would overlook him just because it's Miles Turner, and they tend to do that anyway. But I guess the field's going to get there. But either way, I think that he stands out as a great play, especially on DraftKings where you can roster him with Embiid or Jokic.
By the way, it's interesting to see what that pricing did for ownership on Danilo Gallinari, Gilgeous-Alexander, and Jokic. They're 3, 4, and 5 right now in projected ownership.
Yeah.
So
I guess a good time for a reminder that in NBA, you don't need or usually want to be as contrarian as some other sports. So definitely don't just look at the top of this and say, oh, can't play Miles Turner, can't play Gallo, can't play Gilgeous-Alexander, can't play Jokic, because it's more about just mixing in 1 or 2 low-owned guys than just taking huge stands against the field like you would in a sport like baseball.
Yeah, and so to expand on that quickly, I don't want to take up too much time, but it's an important point. In baseball, ownership, entirely different. And most of you guys know this, but just quickly, it's entirely different because you're looking at players that have pretty equal opportunity despite wildly unequal skill sets. In basketball, the opportunity is not the same whatsoever. From minutes to usage, to just being around the rim, there's so much that goes into that. So no, it's a good point. Like Miles Turner at high ownership, you can get different elsewhere. Does Miles Turner let me down more times than not? Sure. But that's besides the point. having, half of this team sidelined today, and having to rely on guys like Jakar Sampson and TJ Leaf to get all of the backup center minutes. I don't know. How many minutes would you be projecting Turner for today? I get McMillan doesn't love to run him for heavy minutes, but if he played 35 minutes, I wouldn't be shocked at all.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to project probably like 32, but I think that there's definitely there's a strong possibility he gets more than that too. I expect him to pretty much play as many as he can, as long as he's not in foul trouble. I think it's really, really difficult to see how Turner fails outside of injury or foul trouble.
Right. And if this is any indication, he got in foul trouble first, second, and third quarter, right? He just kept getting into trouble against the Sixers. He came in for the fourth. He played 8 straight minutes, caught his 5th foul, and McMillan put him right back in for another 2-minute stint. So he was trying to get him back into this game as much as he possibly could, and it just didn't work.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, I mentioned it already, but obviously Embiid is just a nightmare of a matchup for someone like Turner, who I'd actually gone back and looked. Normally, I don't look too much into previous games, but I'd gone back to see how he had done against Embiid. And every single game, he had finished with somewhere between 4 and 6 fouls. Thomas Bryant is a high usage guy, but Thomas Bryant's a lot more of, mid-range and 3-pointers and playing away from the basket. He's less likely to just be going at Miles Turner at the, in the post like Joel Embiid will.
All right, so top options right now from Indy. Let's assume that Oladipo, who is doubtful, and Malcolm Brogdon do not play. If that's the case, that leaves you without, granted, I know Sabonis hasn't played, but I'm mentioning him anyway because it's such a huge piece. Without Sabonis, without Brogdon, without Oladipo, and Jeremy Lamb, who got hurt way earlier in the season, is another player who would also be out. They're going to have to rely on a ton of guys that they had throughout the year based on the amount of injuries they had, but it's going to open things up quite a bit. Is the pricing good enough for you to get here on these guys outside of Turner? We already talked about him. Yeah,
Turner and Warren both look like priorities. Turner will be better on DraftKings because you can roster 2 centers. Warren's better on FanDuel because he's $700 less than he is on DraftKings, but they're both good plays on both sites. Beyond that, you're getting good value. The pricing came up a little bit on guys, but still, a cheap Aaron Holiday, a cheap Justin Holiday who doesn't do anything, but he plays a bunch of minutes. And the Wizards are the type of team where there's more value than normal in just being on the court, running around and hoping the ball bounces to you. And then TJ McConnell, obviously the minutes a little bit in question because McMillan's been hesitant to play him alongside another point guard. But I think that if Brogdon's out, it probably forces his hand a little bit.
Marcus, thanks for the super chat, brother. Some of chat is really stoked on TJ Warren, Adam. It's a very difficult one for me because on one hand, there's not going to be a ton of competition. He's a 30+% usage guy in the situation that we're likely looking at today. So the biggest question, and I know you kind of touched on this, but it's kind of a hot topic that we need to smooth over based on his salary. Okay. Across the board. So he's $6,700 on FanDuel. On DraftKings, against the Sixers, he was $6,000. He's now up to $7,400. And then over on Super Chat, pulling this up right now, you've got TJ Warren coming in at a 1.5 multiple. That's actually really, really nice.
Yeah, it is.
But $7,400 on DraftKings, 67 on FanDuel. A lot of injuries, number one. Number two, really good matchup against Washington. But when we sift through all the nonsense and all the noise, is TJ Warren still worth it at 7,400?
Yeah, I think that if Brogdon's in, I think Warren on FanDuel is still a top 3 small forward, and on DraftKings, he's in the mix. There's a lot of good options. If Brogdon's out, he's the top small forward for me on both sides.
Okay. I don't see how you can't get him. Even at 7,400, it's ugly, but he's going to go out there and he's going to rip. I don't expect, someone said I could see him dropping another 50 today. I'm not willing to go that far, but the only issue I have with TJ Warren is, generally speaking, he is not someone that's going to work as a facilitator and as a playmaker and also a scorer. I think you would agree, TJ Warren, for him to pay off this price point, he's going to have another big game as a scorer unless he falls into one of those random big rebounding and block shots game.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was about to say. Is the scariest thing is it's always more appealing to fade popular players that are scoring dependent than ones that contribute across the board, because obviously it's just more likely they fail in one category than in all three. It is obviously a good rebounding spot for him to get a few extra rebounds, but he's a scorer. And with these guys off the floor, what increases is his scoring. And I think that's one reason why, I mentioned the usage rate goes up a ton, but his per minute production is still like 1.05 to 1.1 points per minute. It's not like you see him jump up to 1.3 or something like that. And it's because even without Sabonis and Oladipo and Brogdon, he's still not really getting rebounds. He's still not really getting assists on average. So the opportunity goes up a ton, but he still has to make his shots, which against the Wizards is very likely, but still, not a certainty.
If you haven't hit that thumbs up yet, it is really the easiest way to help support us at Awesemo, and we appreciate it every time you take that second to do so. Helps us with the algorithm here. Hit that subscribe button and notification bell as well, so you always know when new content's dropping next. We got a ton of sports going on right now, so trying to make sure when everything's coming out here on the Awesemo YouTube channel. On the Washington Wizards side of the ball, Thomas Bryant has been getting a boatload of minutes. He's $6,300 on DraftKings, which I think is really quite reasonable, actually. $6,300 on FanDuel as well. But he's played 34 and 37 minutes in their first two games back. Now, if you actually dig into this a little bit further, that game against Phoenix where they lost by 13 points, that game was no longer competitive whatsoever. But Thomas Bryant did close the game out along with three other starters. So if you're giving him 35 minutes or so today, I think that's reasonable. He is well above a fantasy point per minute producer on the season too, Adam, and he's coming off a 30.13 rebound game with 3 assists, 2 blocks, and a steal. We know that when Thomas Bryant is locked into big minutes and Scott Brooks isn't tinkering with that front court, he is a very productive player when he gets, sufficient run.
Yeah, he's a really good producer. He's not afraid to shoot. He's one of the guys that sees an uptick in usage without Beal or Bertans on the floor. The only real concern that I would have here is that his salary did jump since yesterday. He's up to $6,300 on DraftKings, which in and of itself is perfectly fine if you're expecting 34 to 36 minutes from him. But it's basically the same price as Miles Turner. You also have Jokic and Embiid. The center position gets a little bit crowded. You have, even on DraftKings, you have Steven Adams for $900 less. So the position's kind of crowded there. And then obviously on FanDuel, it's more crowded since you can only roster one. If you're rostering Thomas Bryant, it means you don't have any of Turner, Embiid, Jokic, among others. So the opportunity cost at least is pretty high on Bryant, and the value isn't what it was the first two games, but he's still going to be one of the highest usage guys on the Wizards. He's a very productive player. It also is a 3 and 4 for Washington. So maybe a little bit concerning, that he played so many minutes in the first two games, but I think he's still a good play. It's just, he's not, I had at least 50% of him each of the first two games. I would be shocked if I got that high here.
Okay. Yeah, I could. The whole 3 and 4 thing could be a bit concerning in terms of production, but from what we know about Scott Brooks, is I doubt he is going to pump the brakes on playing time.
Right.
21% usage rate, 1.2 fantasy points per minute in these 2 games, 70 minutes since he returned. So those are strong enough numbers for me. 15% rebounding rate as well. I don't disagree with you that the opportunity cost is considerably higher than it was before. And that's worth considering, no doubt, especially given that he was $4,600 and $4,800 on DraftKings. Now he's jumped up to $6,300. And the matchup, it's fine. I don't think there's anything spectacular about it. There's nothing terrible about it either. He's a good play, but you're right. You're not going to be coming in with nearly as much as you were on the previous 2 games once this restart began. What about guys like Rui, who in that first game against Phoenix had a solid a team leading 21 points. Again, not a player that's going to do a ton in the way of peripherals. You're going to have to rely on scoring a bit, but he should give you 30 plus minutes. Let's break down this rotation a little bit. It was one of the more questionable ones heading into this with Davis Bertans and Bradley Beal out.
Yeah, so I mean, the minutes for Rui have been really nice. He played huge minutes in the first game, played 32 minutes yesterday against Brooklyn. Drastic differences in how involved he was offensively. Had a 29.8% usage rate the first game, 14.3% yesterday, only took 6 shots. I was, that was obviously disappointing because there had been a lot of talk about him kind of taking on a lot bigger role without Beal, and it looked like that was going to be the case after the first game against Phoenix. But that wasn't the case yesterday. So I think still pretty volatile, but the salaries come up a bit. It actually dropped. It dropped on DraftKings. He was 7,400 yesterday, 5,800 today. So I think that he's a good tournament play on DraftKings because obviously the usage has to go somewhere on this team, and some games it's going to be to him. His salary came up on FanDuel to 6,500. So I'm interested in him on DraftKings, especially because he's a power forward. So you can get exposure to the Washington front court and one of the high usage guys on this team without using your center position like you have to on Bryant. Beyond Rui, you have Troy Brown, who I expected to be one of the biggest beneficiaries without Beal. And the first game, he looked awful. He didn't do anything at all. Usage, rebounding, assists, none of it was there. Yesterday, the exact opposite, had a 50-point fantasy game. He was involved in the pick and roll with Thomas Bryant. He had a 22.2% usage rate, 10 rebounds, 8 assists. That's obviously at the high end of what Troy Brown's going to do, but it's much more in line with what I expected from him in this restart than the first game. He's a capable playmaker, he's a capable rebounder, and he can score a bit. So I think he's a pretty well-rounded player, and he's still cheap enough where 4,500 on draft or on FanDuel and 5,200 on DraftKings. I think there's still some meat on the bone there just because he does contribute in so many categories.
In the backcourt with Napier and Ish Smith, it looks like Brooks is running them for around 5 minutes together a game. They played 10 minutes together in these 2 games, both coming in around 27, 28 minutes per game. But Shabazz Napier has seen, he hasn't seen his price come up. This is where it's been since we began. I don't see that being a really appealing spot if he's playing 27, 26, maybe 28, 25 minutes. I think there's just going to be better value on this slate than having to look at that point guard position and kind of unpredictable rotation for the Wizards.
I agree with you. The one thing I would point out on Napier is that, and it's kind of just an example of how important it is to have to make predictions and then kind of reevaluate them. We expected coming into this that Napier would be one of the highest usage guys on the team and that he would benefit from Beal being out. He's been absolute trash in their first 2 games in terms of production, but the opportunity has been there. He's played 27 and 25 minutes. He shot 4 for 13 in the first game. He shot 2 for 9 in the second game. He also has done nothing in the way of assists. And so his salary hasn't moved. The ownership's going to be down. It's certainly not a core play because the minutes are questionable. You're probably getting 26 to 28 and all of that. But I still think the opportunity is there for him. The usage has been there. It's just that his shot isn't falling.
Yeah, and look, I don't disagree with that. One of the reasons, too, is there's not going to be a single player on this team that does the same thing with the same type of usage every day. You're not going to get your Bradley Beals. Nobody's going to rise from the ashes and become the next Bradley Beal from a usage standpoint. Like nobody through their first 2 games has a usage rate above 25%. You even mentioned Rui. Like Rui had monster usage rate one game, the next game nothing. I think you're probably going to see some hot hand approach here where, all right, we're not very good. If Shabazz Napier gets it going, we'll let him get up as many shots as possible. So it's a very risky proposition. I don't hate the idea of it. I think 5,700 is fine, but I'm also not huge on the fact that he hasn't played north of 27 minutes in 2 of these games. I would have liked to have seen him get around 30, especially if Brooks is already going to give him some minutes alongside Ish Smith, which has happened.
Yeah, the minutes for me is the biggest concern. I do think that if he's playing well, he probably gets a few more minutes. But he's just run really bad in terms of production. I mentioned the shooting. I just pulled up the potential assist numbers through the first 2 games. He's second on the team to Ish Smith with 7 potential assists per game. He's only averaging 2.5 assists per game. You compare that to Smith. Smith's averaging 2 more potential assists per game in 2 more minutes per game, but he's gotten an extra 3.5 assists per game. So really running bad in both departments. And so I think, maybe a candidate to to do a lot better. To your point about the inconsistent usage for, inconsistent usage leaders, I think really in any game, it can be one of Napier, Smith, Brown, Rui, or Thomas Bryant.
That's what I'm saying, yeah.
Right. The best way to approach that really is to roster the guys whose prices are falling and then fade the ones whose prices are rising, especially, coming off of a big game because they're going to get more ownership.
What about setting groups? Having a pretty good idea that this is not going to be one of those teams ever, or at least very seldom will you see this be one of those teams where you've got 3 guys from the Washington Wizards going off.
I think that it's obviously, for one, it's pricing dependent. Right. When they were all really cheap, I was playing as many as I could. Now that they're coming up, you're not going to do that quite as much. I'm still not playing Smith and Napier together, even though they are getting some minutes alongside each other. It's just not enough for me to want them together.
It's like 5 minutes a game, yeah.
Yeah. But I think the rest of them are okay. Like, obviously, you're not playing Thomas Bryant with Mo Wagner, but I have no issues really having Brown and Rui together, or Brown and Bryant, or Rui and Bryant.
Okay. Top plays from this one, both sides.
Warren, Turner, Troy Brown on FanDuel.
Okay. If you guys haven't checked out Awesemo.com yet, well, we have a lot of free content here at YouTube, but if you want to dive deeper in, if you want to get a look at the projections, the top-notch ownership projections, the lineup builder tool, all of our top stack tools, our boom or bust tool for NBA, all of this stuff developed by Alex Baker and used by him as well. You also know him as Awesemo, number 1 ranked DFS player in the world. You can come check it out, and you can get 50% off. I think we still have this promo code. Let me make sure we still have this going, because it is a fantastic promo code. It'll give you 50% off everything, and it goes till today. Okay, it goes through today. It's the last chance you can get this. 50% off an Awesemo Plus monthly pass, all access to everything. If you want to dip your toes into PGA or even NASCAR, MMA, you name it, you've got it. PGA, MLB, everything on the site, 50% off. That's $45 a month for the best projections you're going to find, the ownership, all of our tools, all of our premium articles, and so much more. Use the sign-up code at checkout, RESTART. RESTART. It'll get you 50% off your first month of Awesemo Plus. Go to awesemo.com/join. And if you haven't checked out the tools, if you're not familiar with what we have, scroll to the bottom of that page, awesemo.com/join, and you'll see like tutorial videos on all of our most popular tools and how to use them. So you're not going in, flying in blind to all of this, and when you're opening up your wallet exactly what you're getting. So use that sign-up code RESTART at checkout. 50% off your first month of everything across the site. Fantasy Cruncher add-on is separate. It is good through today, and then it's over. All right. 3 to go. 3 down, 3 to go. New Orleans against the Memphis Grizzlies. It's ingrained into me to say like at home hosting the New Orleans Pelicans, but I'm going to have to break out of that one. The Pelicans are 4.5-point favorites. They just got lit up by the LA Clippers, who I believe broke a franchise record for 3 points made in a game. But Adam, this one has a slate high 236 over under. So we should be expecting to see a ton of scoring here and a very little amount of defense on both sides. This is also a really big game for the Pels because they're looking to get into this 8th seed in these seeding games. The Memphis Grizzlies now still sitting in that 8th spot, barely holding on. Let's start with the Grizzlies. We'll call them the road team. They really aren't. And I actually want to start with the center rotation because Joval got himself into some foul trouble against Portland, only played 14 minutes. Brandon Clark came in and just lit it up. What do you see in terms of minutes for the front court here? And then we can work our way down through the wings and the back court.
It was obviously really tough to take anything away from that first game since Joval was in constant foul trouble. More of the normal rotation yesterday. Joval got 28 minutes. Brandon Clark off the bench got 25. The one thing that was interesting was Clark closed over Joval.
Joval had like 5 fouls in the first 10 minutes or something insane.
What'd you say?
I said Joval had, in the one game, he had like 5 fouls in the first few minutes. Were you talking about the next game against San Antonio?
I was talking about yesterday.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
Clark closed.
Yeah, my fault.
But it also, San Antonio closed. Pirtle was out there for a little bit, but then they closed with Rudy Rudy Gay at the 5. So I mean, that's the spot where you would expect Clark to be out there. The good thing was, you at least got 28 minutes from Jovel. So I expect it to be back to the normal 28 to 30 minutes that you were typically getting from Jovel during the first part of the season. And then Clark playing backup minutes and getting, a few minutes next to Jovel.
This also could be it was a pretty competitive game throughout. I wanted to say this could have something to do with a back-to-back. We know how Jovel's for some reason treated with kid gloves no matter where he goes, or they just don't want to give him additional minutes. But you're right, 28 minutes. Not only did he not close, but he didn't come back after that late third quarter, early fourth quarter rotation. I don't know. Do you think that's a sign of things to come here?
I think it's probably mostly going to be matchup dependent. Like if you look at what the Spurs were doing, you could have had Jovel sub in when Pirtle came back and they didn't. So I guess that's kind of concerning, but you also had Rudy Gay playing a lot of center minutes.
Yeah. Your closing rotation for the Spurs, you had Keldon Johnson, Rudy Gay, Derek White, DeJounte Murray, and DeMar DeRozan. So a super small lineup.
Yeah, and I mean, the Pels is obviously not a team that you have to go big either. You're going to get a bunch of minutes from Derek Favors at the 5. But I do think it's a really good matchup for Jovel from a production standpoint. I'm going to end up projecting him for around 28 to 30 minutes. I think that at his salary, he'll look like a good play, but it's going to be limited to basically just being a contrarian tournament option because we've already touched on so many centers that we like. We already said there was a lot of opportunity cost for someone like Thomas Bryant. The same is even more true for someone like Jovel.
And this is also a 3-4 for the Memphis Grizzlies. I think we'll probably be saying a lot of that as we close these games out. 7,900 is a bit steep. And let's close out the conversation on Jovel with this. And I'll ask you, not every position is going to be deep on a slate like this with only 5 games, 6 games on FanDuel. Is it deep enough on DraftKings to not necessarily need to get there? He's $7,000 on FanDuel, which I think is a little bit different, but you do have a utility spot on DraftKings. You have a forward spot. A lot of these guys have multi-position eligibility, but Joel Embiid, we haven't talked about him yet. We talked about Nikola Jokic. There are a decent amount. Thomas Bryant might be a little bit too expensive, but he's going to play a ton of minutes. Miles Turner. It's a relatively deep position for an abbreviated slate.
Yeah, and that's what's going to make it really hard to get a lot of exposure, or he's just not going to be in optimal lineups. But I do think he's a good tournament play, and I don't mean that in terms of like a cop out where it's like, yeah, he could do well. But we kind of talked earlier about the ownership at the top being on guys that we like. Within any one lineup, though, you look at like DraftKings ownership, for example, where you have Miles Turner at 33%, you have Jokic at 29%, you have Bryant at 28%. I really like all of those guys. But within one lineup, if you have those other popular players that also look really good, and then you just take a 4% owned Jovel over Miles Turner or over Nikola Jokic, your tournament your lineup is contrarian, and you're not giving up anything in the way of upside because Jovel is such a productive player. You're giving up medium projection because Turner and Jokic are going to project so well, but your lineup isn't any less likely to go off by playing Jovel. So that's where, that's what I mean by he's a good tournament play. It's not just, I think he can do well, but it's tough to get to him.
All right. So Ja Morant is right now projected to have the highest ownership. And I don't know where you're at. We haven't talked about it before the show, but I have no problem with that whatsoever. This is somebody whose minutes were all over the place leading up to March 11th, right? Throughout the most of his rookie campaign, there has not been a ton of certainty, but now you've seen him get monster minutes. Taylor Jenkins, I don't know what it is, but Taylor Jenkins has come on and just decided that he's going to get as many minutes as he can handle. The Portland game was overtime, right? But he still played 36 minutes in regulation, 37 minutes against the San Antonio Spurs. These are some of the most run that we've seen him get all season long, thrown right back into the fire for this restart. He's attempted 40 shots in 2 games. Adam, he came 1 rebound, 1 assist shy from a triple-double in regulation against the Spurs. He had 22, 11, and 5 against Portland. Granted, the extra 5-minute period didn't hurt, but it's shocking to me that Ja Morant is still only 7,300. And that's what it comes down to. If he was 8,500, 8,300, sure, but he's 7,300 here, sitting at like the sixth highest priced player at his own position.
Yeah, 7,500 on FanDuel, both probably $1,000 too cheap.
Right.
You mentioned, the playing time has been the biggest thing this year. He's averaged 1.06 DraftKings points per minute, but I think it's probably going a little bit overlooked that Tyus Jones is out for Memphis. Jones isn't just some replaceable backup that was out there. He's actually a good backup point guard, and so I think that to some extent he was limiting how many minutes Morant was playing, at least on average, because Jones was going to get his backup minutes. Now you don't have him out there. You have, Kyle Anderson running backup point. You have really no other. You have D'Anthony Melton. You don't even have another true point guard.
You can't even run Justice Winslow out there as a backup point guard.
Right. So I think the path is there now for Ja Morant to just play as many minutes as he can. You're not taking minutes away from anyone who matters. And so I think that makes a really big difference, on top of obviously they are trying to hold on to the 8 seed here. So I'm going, right back to around the 36 minute projection for Morant, and the salary is just clearly wrong.
It is. And it just, honestly, 32% on Ja Morant almost seems a little bit too low on DraftKings, but it can't be overstated how valuable every single game is for this team. Now, the Pelicans, I think they lost both games since returning.
I'm not sure.
They lost both games since coming back. Hell, this was a team I thought that had so much for superstar Zion. Am I right? I'm just kidding. I don't know. Well, we'll get to them in a second. I don't want to get ahead of ourselves. Outside of Morant, who we both really like, and you mentioning that Joval is a quality tournament option, is there anyone else in the middle here for the Memphis Grizzlies that stands out to you? Can I interest you in some Jaren Jackson?
Yeah, I mean, he's due for some foul trouble, but he's managed to stay out of it the first couple of games, looked really good on both ends. And the salary for him is still, I think, too cheap. His salary is at least rising, but he's still 6,200 on DraftKings, 6,400 on FanDuel. Memphis is right up there with Indiana as far as being in incredibly favorable position here in their matchup. So I do want to go back to Jackson. Obviously, he's going to probably be dealing with Zion for like 18 to 20 minutes. There's plenty of foul trouble concern there, but he is a really high usage guy. He's still favorably priced. I do think he's someone that if he's getting a lot of ownership, which right now we have him at 23% on DraftKings, absolutely the kind of guy you can pivot away from because he is so volatile. Like, I would rather be pivoting away from a 23% owned Jackson than a 32% owned Morant, for example.
All right. On the other side, Zion Williamson. I think most people would be disappointed in seeing what he's been able to do just from an opportunity standpoint. He's played 29 total minutes in his first 2 games back. You look at a 2-point loss to Utah in the opener here. Well, the Orlando opener, and can't help but wonder what type of difference that could have made. He scored 13 real points in 15 minutes, did not haul in a single rebound, but he's got a 31.5% usage rate in those spots. I tweeted the other day his usage rate was monstrous when he first made his debut earlier in his rookie season, but I don't know what we're getting. Maybe like you said, we get around 20 minutes. It's very much a possibility. If you take Zion off the floor, what are we getting? Because you know that Brandon Ingram is likely going to do more in that case, but it hasn't changed a ton. 28% usage rate around the fantasy point per minute. Pretty much everybody in these 2 games since they've returned, Adam, has been on some level a little bit disappointing.
Yeah, they have. And I mean, obviously that includes just getting absolutely murdered by the Clippers in their last game.
Crushed.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's a much better spot for them going up against Memphis. I think the pricing isn't great. 8,100 on Brandon Ingram when so far in the first 3.5 games we've talked about, you've had so many just clearly underpriced guys. You get an $8,100 Ingram on DraftKings. I think that's about where he should be. 7,400 on FanDuel is a really good salary. He's a small forward, so obviously you're dealing with TJ Warren at the same position, but I think Ingram's one of the best small forward plays on FanDuel. I think on DraftKings it's more of a contrarian pivot in tournaments because he does have that 50-point upside. He is very, very capable of it. But in terms of, maximizing your point per dollar projections, he's probably not going to get into your lineups.
What about Lonzo Ball's minutes in these first two games?
Played, I think, 28 in the first one.
27 and then 24. Yeah. I know it was a blowout, but still very limited minutes for a guy that in March was averaging 38 or so minutes.
Yeah, definitely concerning. In the first half against the Clippers, he did play almost 16 minutes, played an 8.5 minute first stint, and then 7.25 in the second one. Didn't get any fourth quarter run, but he did play 8 minutes in the third quarter. So maybe, probably was going to get in that 28 to 30 minute range, which you would like to see more, but it's at least enough to make him somewhat appealing, although an $8,000 salary on DraftKings isn't great. $6,900 on FanDuel is a little bit better. But obviously you have Ja Morant in the same price range, so it'll be tough to prioritize Lonzo.
I just don't think I can get to him on DraftKings. Maybe I will. It's possible, but that seems like an overpricing, especially given, like you said, especially given Ja Morant's price. I don't know how you do that. I guess it's possible, but he's a triple double threat. Understood. You will get some big games from Lonzo Ball, but even at higher ownership, I think I'd still rather take the savings on Ja Morant in a spectacular matchup coming back against the New Orleans Pelicans. So I don't know. Maybe if Lonzo Ball's ownership is extremely low, which I would imagine on DraftKings it probably will be. Yeah, we've got him around 5% right now. It's possible that Alvin Gentry gets him back to those minutes that he was playing before. I guess that would be the question, Adam. It doesn't seem crazy to think that someone like Lonzo Ball, who was playing 35 plus minutes every game, could get back to that. I'm just not necessarily sure the exact reason for why he's been limited so much in the first two.
Yeah, I mean, he's the perfect example of there really being two kinds of volatility in NBA DFS. One is the production, but the other is some guys have a much wider range of minutes. If Lonzo comes out there and he's playing out of his mind, is Alvin Gentry really just saying, no, man, you're playing 28 minutes today?
Right.
So yeah, I think, I agree with you. The path is there if he's playing really well to get more minutes, which is always nice. And that's the kind of thing that does make someone a little bit more appealing in tournaments. The thing that I think will still make it really tough to get there is you have this top tier of guys that we really like that are popular, but we've already had several guys that are like a tier below that where we're like, okay, we like them. They're tournament pivots. You're not gonna be able to prioritize them. I think Lonzo is probably like a third tier guy. So it's really just starting to be, you can only play so many guys.
You have anything else from the Pelican side?
If what's Derek Favors on draft? Yeah, if Derek Favors wasn't a center, I'd be interested, but
yeah, 5,300.
That's tough. $3,700 on DraftKings for JJ Redick. It's a spot where he should get some open threes, but you're still talking about someone that does nothing except shoot threes, basically. Yeah,
completely scoring dependent. Had 21 points against Utah, finished with 30 fantasy points. Whatever he scores is close to what he's going to have in terms of fantasy points, because the 7 combined rebounds and assists on the 30th is not something you should be expecting from JJ Redick whatsoever on a daily basis. He'll do it once in a while, but it's unlikely that you're going to be getting reliable assist totals from him. Top options from this game, obviously Ja Morant. Who else?
Yeah, Ja Morant, Brandon Ingram on FanDuel, Jaren Jackson, although I do think because of his volatility and his price coming up a little bit, he's someone where, not saying I'm not going to play Jaren Jackson, just he's one of the guys where I'm more comfortable pivoting off of than some of the other chalk that we really like.
Okay. What would you give Zion today? 20 minutes?
Yeah, I'll be 18 to 20.
Yeah.
Like he said that he feels fine, but Gentry has also said that basically they're just not going to play him.
Yeah. What is the real purpose of that?
I'm not really sure. Like Zion says he's fine, he feels fine, he can play more, but they're just being cautious. The quote from Gentry before the second game, I think, was that
was what?
The quote from Gentry before the second game, I think, was that he was basically going to be doing more of the same in the second and third game.
How many minutes do you think he would have? And then we'll move on. But I'm just trying to figure this out a little bit. We know he's playing in his short bursts. Against the Clippers, he played 5.5 minutes in the first. Then he started the second, played almost 5 minutes. Then he played 4 minutes in the third, never returned to that game. It was a 42-point game in the fourth quarter. So, yeah, I guess, and you may have mentioned this. If so, I apologize. But yeah, he put him around 20, 21 minutes in that game, unless Alvin Gentry decides that he wants to, extend him to 6-minute rotations. And then he's looking at around 24 minutes. But even if that happens to be the case, you're not even getting a discount. Like if Zion's price reflected his production and his salary, then maybe I'd say, if he plays 25 minutes, he could explode. But there's really no point of even continuing this conversation, given that his price has actually come up or stayed exactly where it was. So let's move on.
Yeah, plus we have, it's not like they're really leaving much to the imagination on his minutes. They basically said, this is what we're doing, and then they're doing it.
Right. San Antonio and Philadelphia. Philadelphia 76ers squandered a 41.21 rebound game from Joel Embiid. I think he's the first person to have a 40-20 game and play less than 35 minutes in the last 35 years. So if you were worried about the injuries, if you were worried about that calf that he was dealing with, I would definitely not be concerned with that at all anymore. I would more so be concerned with Brett Brown's coaching because he stinks. But I digress. It's bad. I'm just.
If only you had Markelle Fultz.
Dude, don't get me started. Don't get me started on Twitter losing their minds because he hit a shot from his own fucking 3-point line.
Hey man, you hit a 70-foot three, and there's a really good chance that you will be the best two-way player in the league next year.
Did you see the tweet I quoted yesterday?
Yeah, that's what I was just referring to.
Is that what you just said? My fault. This guy says, I have a feeling next year we're going to be having the conversation about Markelle Fultz being the best two-way player in the league. Listen, man.
That's like one of the ridiculous things about like sports Twitter. Like you can, if you said like Markelle Fultz is going to be a really good two-way player, he's better than people think, like that's fine. That's a good take. It'll get interaction. You don't need to just say he's going to be the best player in the NBA.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Giannis, KD, Joel Embiid as a two-way player, Kawhi Leonard, Paul George, Klay Thompson, Jimmy Butler. He's just, and I didn't even name everybody. He's just going to leapfrog all of Markelle Fultz is going to leapfrog all of them as the best two-way player, or at least in the conversation. Right. And yeah, I'm bitter. Yeah. Fuck all of this, man. I'm bitter. But at the same time, I'm a realist, Adam. And I can quite frankly tell you that when I see Markelle Fultz have big games in Orlando, I get a little bit upset. But everyone after yesterday's game, because he shot like 7 of 9 or 6 for 9 and knocked down a 3, I'm not including the other one, fine, but he knocked down one actual traditional 3. That, oh my God, look what he's done. Are we forgetting about the day where I had to come on here and say just because Markelle Fultz had a triple-double that he is not going to continue doing this? All I'm saying is when you know that a guy has been a disappointment, when he shoots 6 for 9 in a game and is now now we're talking about him being the best two-way player in the league.
Right. And I think there's a good chance he will be good. I think that's a really reasonable take.
Sure.
But yeah, it's everybody has to be like the best at, this guy had a good game. He's the new best. Like, I think we've gone through 4 best players in the NBA in the last 2 years between Paul George, KD, Giannis, and Harden and LeBron.
I'll end it with it. Don't envy my status. He's a Philly guy. He said, every time Markelle Fultz has a big game, I have to hear about it. Exactly. I catch tweets nonstop every time he has a big game. Like, told you so, Laffy. Anyway, let's talk about the San Antonio Spurs. There's kind of a good amount to get into here, knowing that LaMarcus Aldridge is not in the bubble. Jakob Poeltl last game played 21 minutes and fouled out, Adam. That came after the Sacramento game where he played 32 minutes. He is someone that will get into foul trouble on a relatively routine basis, and that's exactly what happened last game. Probably has a lot to do with him not closing that one out. Not a high usage guy whatsoever. He's up to $5,100 on DraftKings. On FanDuel, Jakob Poeltl's coming in at $6,500. Whoa, $6,500 for the Poeltl. That surprises me a little bit. And on SuperDraft, he is 1.85. So the reason I just want to start with him here is because this is the position, or at least the front court, where I think it's going to be more in flux than anywhere else, with Eubanks and Pirtle and Rudy Gay potentially getting minutes there if that happens, because you're not only without Aldridge, but you're also without Trey Lyles. So it's an entirely different look than we got all season long.
Yeah, I think that the biggest like risk for Pirtle will be foul trouble in these games, because you don't have most of the guys that Pop would like to use to steal minutes from him are not there. So, I think that when he's not in foul trouble, you'll see those 32-minute games like you got against Sacramento. At FanDuel's price, where you only get one center, it's not really a consideration. I'd rather go to Thomas Bryant. I'd rather go to Miles Turner at that price point. I'd rather go to Embiid or Jokic at the top. On DraftKings, it's still a pretty decent value at 5,100. Still a lot of competition, though. You do have Derek Favors there. You have Steven Adams at that price point. And then you have, Bryant and Turner, not that much more expensive. So it's still really tough to prioritize. It's another guy where it's kind of similar to Bryant, where, yesterday I had, I think, like 65% Pirtle because I thought he was one of the best values on the slate. Today, I don't expect nearly that much. And that's reflected in the ownership projections as well, where we have him at about 13% on DraftKings. I think that's a very reasonable ownership projection. I think that he's a pretty decent value, but it's just that you run into the opportunity cost of using a center spot on a guy that you're hoping gets you like 30 DraftKings points is a problem.
Yeah, I'm not getting there. And Jerry mentioned in chat what we're all probably thinking. If Pirtle's someone that can get himself into foul trouble, and you and I both preach a lot, like predicting foul trouble is an easy way to get yourself into trouble, right? Because you're like, oh, this guy's going to foul out in the first 5 minutes, and then he doesn't, right? And then he goes on to play 30 plus minutes. But it's a particularly ugly spot for Jakob Pirtle.
Yeah, it is. The flip side, I guess, is that he's probably going to play. Pop would like him to play as many minutes as he can.
Because who else does he have? What's he going to throw Eubanks out there for?
Right.
You're absolutely right, and that's why I'm saying if he isn't in early foul trouble, he probably gets extended run.
Right. So yeah, I mean, the foul trouble is just another risk factor. The biggest argument against Pirtle for me is still that he's just not likely to produce at the same rates as guys like Bryant and Turner and the more expensive centers. So the opportunity cost would be reason number one that I won't have a ton of Pirtle. The foul trouble certainly adds risk to that, though.
Okay. So the whole season's been a frustrating one with the backcourt here. DeJounte Murray's minutes have been all over the place, and it's unfortunate because on a per minute basis, hell, through the first 10 days of the season, he led the league in fantasy points per minute for anyone playing more than 25 minutes or 20 minutes per game, but he was so limited. He's been absolutely all over the place, and I'd love to get your take on this one because you got 21 minutes from DeJounte Murray in their first game on Friday, and then yesterday he played 34 minutes against the Memphis Grizzlies and ended up having a 21-10 double-double. When Murray's out there, generally speaking, he's going to produce. Even in that first game, he still averaged a little bit over a fantasy point per minute. He's $6,200 on DraftKings. On FanDuel, Murray is, what's he at? 57. He's one of these players that makes it difficult to kind of gauge, but he's got a matchup against a Sixers team that defensively should have been much better than they are, and they still haven't figured it out. He's on a team that doesn't have LaMarcus Aldridge, and there won't be as much competition for usage here. Does that price tag appeal to you at all?
Yeah, it does, especially because I'm definitely projecting over 30 minutes here. The first game, I'm not taking anything away from it because he was just in massive foul trouble the whole time. He played 21 minutes, but one foul in his first rotation, picked up two more in the second quarter. So he finished the first half with 3 fouls, picked up his fourth 23 seconds into the third quarter, went to the bench, came back in, played 2.5 minutes and picked up his fifth. There was just no way he was going to be able to play normal minutes in that game. But prior to leaving in the first half with his third foul, his rotation was basically identical to what he was doing yesterday. Playing the first around 6 minutes of the quarter, subbing out, and then subbing back in for Derek White later in the first, playing into the second. So I think, the 33, 34 minutes is where you're going to come in at on Murray, as long as he's not in foul trouble. We are gonna need to see news here. Marco Bellinelli missed yesterday's game. If he's out, that's obviously one body missing. But you also have Patty Mills, who had been held out of scrimmages, was held out of the first game of the restart, played yesterday. Who knows if he's available today on the back-to-back. So potentially a really shorthanded team, in addition to the fact that I think Murray is just the guy anyway.
So it's possible that we could have Forbes and Bellinelli out. And that's it, right?
And I mean, I think it's possible Mills sits on the back-to-back.
Okay.
But yeah, and also as far as Murray's minutes go, Forbes is a big deal because it's kind of like we had talked about with John Morant getting more minutes because Tyus Jones is out. During the regular season when Forbes was in, you had Derek White backing up DeJounte Murray. So Derek White's going to get his minutes, and that's going to limit Murray to some extent. Now you have them playing alongside each other in the starting lineup. So Murray's minutes are just wide open for him to take.
Yep. You're going to have to make some moves there. No doubt about it. Derek White played what? He's played 34 minutes of both. And good call on the foul trouble. I missed that or forgot about that with DeJounte Murray. That's pretty important. So, yeah, Derek White played 34 minutes in both games. They're not really in a position to – okay, so everyone was talking about the Blazers and Pels making the playoffs, and I was there too. I liked the Pels. I did, at least, before they lost their first two games. Their schedule gets easier, but – right now the Spurs are 2 games out of the 8th seed. It's possible that by the time these seeding games end, the Spurs are in 8th place, and then they'd only have to win 1 game in that play-in tournament instead of 2. So they're in a pretty enviable spot here in the Western Conference, Adam, and I think that has a lot to do with Pop kind of just throwing caution to the wind and saying, let's go. Let's try and hit that 8th seed. We're 2 games back.
Yeah, and I think it helps too that it just so happens that he doesn't really have veterans that he has to worry about too much. DeRozan is fine; he's going to play big minutes. Rudy Gay, maybe he would like to play a little bit less, but you're not really concerned about him. But like Murray and White and Lonnie Walker and Keldon Johnson, like these aren't guys that Pop would typically be resting anyway.
Okay.
And I guess speaking of Rudy Gay, he played 26 or 27 minutes and then 29 minutes yesterday. I'm not as optimistic about his minutes here because he's been playing a lot of center, or at least a decent amount of center. So I think that I think this obviously isn't a matchup where he's going to be going up against Joel Embiid.
Okay. And the last one I wanted to mention here, DeMar DeRozan, surprisingly, with a 21.9% usage rate in these 2 games since he's returned, a lot of minutes, a lot of opportunity, but very minimal shooting for him. 10 and 13 field goal attempts. Like I said, less than a 22% usage rate. He is dishing out assists at a high clip. I don't know how sustainable something like that is. He's got 17 in 2 games, but that's just a price point that for me is something I'm not looking to get to. Unless, he comes out and he pulls a TJ Warren and drops a 50 banger on the Sixers. He's still up there in price for sure.
Yeah, I think that'll be the biggest issue. I had a lot of him the first 2 days. It obviously did not go well, especially yesterday.
He was fine against Sacramento. He had 48 DraftKings points.
Yeah, it was it looked like he was going to do terrible, and then he ended up doing fine. He did do terrible yesterday. The biggest thing, though, will be, so actually on DraftKings now, he's only small forward eligible, so it makes it harder to get him into lineups anyway. But he's expensive, and you have so many underpriced guys. I'm not overly concerned about the usage. It's definitely a situation where I'm more interested in what the numbers look like for the entire season than for these 2 games. And he's played 296 minutes this year with DeJounte Murray on the floor and LaMarcus Aldridge on the bench. He has a 27.7% usage rate. He's averaged 1.06 DraftKings points per minute. He's still playing 38 minutes. So I think everything's fine for DeMar DeRozan. I'm not concerned about him, but I do think that it'll just be tough to be getting to him when like TJ Warren's cheaper, when Brandon Ingram is a little bit cheaper. So I think another guy that I had a ton of yesterday that I won't be having nearly as much of today.
Highest usage on this team, Rudy Gay and DeJounte Murray through the first 2. Also feels like another team where you're just going to have to take shots and hope that one of those guys happens to go off, because unless DeMar DeRozan starts turning it on in a big way, I think you're probably going to see him sit around 25% usage throughout this, which I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. It should be higher, Adam, given that with LaMarcus Aldridge being off the floor almost all of the time, each season that they've played together in San Antonio, DeMar DeRozan has taken a much more significant offensive role, but we haven't seen it quite yet. What about the Philadelphia 76ers? Joel Embiid Huge game, despite not playing in any of those scrimmages. He had 41 and 21 in 34 minutes, 4 assists, 3 blocks, a steal, 81 DraftKings points in the loss. He's 10-3 on DraftKings. On FanDuel, he is 9,700. And on SuperDraft, he is 1.15 multiplier, the same as Nikola Jokic. The very simple question here is who is going to stop Joel Embiid on the San Antonio Spurs? I don't think they have the bodies to do it. And even if they have a couple guys that have some size, they're just frequently in foul trouble, and he's going to body the hell out of them down low. I don't think they have the personnel.
So it's really similar to me it's similar to the Indiana matchup, because Indiana had Miles Turner, where it's like, okay, if he can stay out of foul trouble, if Embiid can't get him in foul trouble, it's at least a center that can play defense. And now with San Antonio, you have Poeltl who can defend. But if you get Poeltl in foul trouble, there is no backup for San Antonio. You have Drew Eubanks, you have Rudy Gay, you have whatever other centers the Spurs haven't been using at all in their rotation. There's nobody out there that's slowing down Embiid if he's able to get some fouls on Poeltl, which is a pretty realistic possibility. So it's really similar to me in that he can just absolutely eat if he gets the starter out of the game. And it's not like you're expecting Poeltl to actually stop him anyway. It's just that the matchup gets even better if Poeltl's in foul trouble.
Yeah, and nobody averages as many post possessions per game than Joel Embiid. And that's something that can really easily get these guys into trouble. That's what it's coming from, right? So, I think you're I wanted to see something, to see if Brett Brown, having Ben Simmons at the 4 and moving things around a little bit, if it made a considerable difference in terms of how much Embiid was posting up. What was this game? Saturday, right? Saturday, the 1st? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so Joel Embiid in this game against the Pacers, where he had 41 points, had 12 post-ups. So that's almost 4 more than he averages on the entire season. And he didn't play 40 minutes. Is that only one game? Yeah, absolutely. I'm not saying read too much into that, but I think you are going to get far more efficient opportunities from Joel Embiid now that this lineup looks the way it does. I love him today. I really like Jokic as well. I think if you're paying up, the center position has opportunity to pay up and pay down. I can only think, Adam, and I haven't built any lineups yet, that I'm going to have quite a bit of center in the utility spot as well.
Yeah, I think that's a logical conclusion just based on how many times on this show I've said it's tough because he's a center. There's a lot of really good center plays today. I do like that, right now we have Jokic projected a little bit higher than Embiid. You have Turner getting a lot of ownership there as well. So naturally it's just going to keep Embiid's ownership in check. And he is the most expensive of the group. So I think that like in cash games, you're probably going Turner and Jokic since they're cheap. But that gives you the opportunity in tournaments to just make Jokic into Embiid, save a little bit of money elsewhere and get what I think is the better play out of the two.
Where else are you going here for the 76ers outside of Joel Embiid?
Probably not too much of anything. Ben Simmons you can always get to. I was pulling up the rebounding numbers from their last game. He was 3rd on the team behind Embiid and Harris in rebounding chances with 15. He grabbed 13 rebounds, so grabbed basically every chance he got. That should come down a little bit, but you do expect more rebounding chances with him playing at the 4 now. So I think he's fine. I don't have any problems with Simmons, but also not someone that I'm going to be prioritizing because he's $20 or $1,800 more. I don't know, $1,800 more than John Morant, I think, if my math is right. So it's really tough to.
Tough math.
What'd you say?
Tough math.
Yeah, I think it's 1,800, but tough to prioritize him. Not obviously when you're looking at small forward, he's a lot more expensive than guys like TJ Warren. So good differentiation play in tournaments, not someone that I'll have a lot of.
Man, I still feel like based on whatever ownership looks like, that it could make him a little bit more interesting. How many potential rebound chances did you say he had?
15.
He had 15 potential assists as well.
That's good.
So it's a pretty big number.
Usage rate was about 20%, so it didn't really take a hit there.
Yeah, and he only had 4 assists. You talked about potential like outlier spots. 4 assists on 15 potential assists. I definitely much prefer Ja Morant just based on that price, no question. And the salary on Ben Simmons at 9,100, it's a little tough, but it does feel like there was a lot left on the table there with only 4 assists. 15 potential assists is a lot in a game, man. And he played 38 minutes as well. So the one advantage with Ben Simmons, and we saw this before, is Brett Brown's going to play him for a ton of minutes every single game. And if he played 40 minutes in regulation tonight, I wouldn't be surprised. It's Simmons and Embiid for me. Outside of that, I'm just having a tough time finding anything else I like here. Maybe you have a different opinion. Tobias Harris at 8,600. I know he's coming off a big game, but 29 field goal attempts and 30 points. I can't pay that much for Tobias Harris on DraftKings. And then the rest of this rotation is just going to be a very tough one to get to, with Howell Neto getting a bunch of run and then Shake Milton coming out and not returning. Al Horford only playing 20-some minutes. It's those 2 guys for me, and I like them quite a bit, but that's it. Do you have anybody else?
I'll add a little bit to the Ben Simmons. I'm with you as far as the salary being expensive, especially on DraftKings. I think he carries more appeal on FanDuel because you're probably going to get a lot of tournament lineups where the build is either DeJounte Murray plus Ja Morant, or it's one of Murray, Durant plus a value guy like Aaron Holiday or Morris. Getting the different build and paying up for Ben Simmons gives you the opportunity to just smash those pairings potentially in terms of raw points. So I think that could be one contrarian way to go in tournaments.
Okay. Ready to close this one out?
Yep.
Thanks to all you guys sticking with us. We're at 1,200 right now at 11:38 on a Monday morning. Appreciate all of you. Hit that thumbs up if you haven't done so yet as well. Let's close it out right here. LA Lakers, Utah Jazz. I don't know how much you plan on getting to in this one, but this is exactly why I'm asking you. Lakers 6.5 point favorites against Utah. 216 total. Actually, the lowest of any game on this slate. Memphis, New Orleans, easily the highest. And then you've got Indy, Washington at 228.5, followed by Philly and San Antonio. And then you got 3 games below 220. That's Miami, Toronto, Denver, OKC, and then this one down at 216. So we'll start with the LA Lakers. One impressive win against the Clippers to open up the restart. One very underwhelming loss against Toronto. Now you come in big favorites against the Jazz. LeBron James is 10-7 on DraftKings. Anthony Davis, who is probable to play, is 9,800. LeBron James also probable, so not too worried about that. Are you getting to the 2 top options for the Lakers today?
I think I'll get to more on FanDuel than DraftKings. They're really cheap on FanDuel at $10K for James and 9,600 for Davis. On DraftKings, it's a little bit tougher since you have so much roster flexibility. You can play a lot of these really, really underpriced guys in a lot of positions. Whatever James or Davis I get to, I'll be happy with. But whenever they're both healthy, I think that they're more of luxuries than necessities because they do eat into each other's production enough that it's at least somewhat concerning. But the minutes are there for them, both playing around 35, 36 minutes. And it's a, pretty neutral matchup against Utah.
All right. Are you into the Lakers at all here? It's funny. I was looking at how this team was functioning since they've returned. And man, it's kind of wild. LeBron James has been, his numbers seem pretty, if you're looking at usage and you're looking at just overall opportunity, he's been fine. He's got a 28% usage rate, 1.26 fantasy points per minute, though. His assist rate's at 41%. You just haven't seen those explosive games from LeBron James yet. 42 and 44 DraftKings points in both 34 and 35 minutes. I'd expect him to continue seeing something around that. His scoring totals have definitely been down, though. There's no doubt about that. So, matter of fact, if you look at usage and you take players that are getting more than just a couple minutes, Dion Waiters has a 21% usage rate. It's the 3rd highest on the team behind LeBron James and Anthony Davis since we got underway. I'm not including the 13 total minutes Markieff Morris played.
Yeah, Dion Waiters is shooting. That's not really too surprising. You're expecting, 20 to 22 minutes from him. He's 3,200 on DraftKings.
That's why I mentioned it.
In large field, you're not expecting much, but he's certainly at least capable of just filling it up and being a good play at that price. I would say he's probably
temper your excitement, please.
Right. He's probably just the most exciting like min salary guy that we've gotten to today on DraftKings. The last couple of slates we had, clear guys that you actually liked, like Keldon Johnson, like Lonnie Walker, like Michael Porter Jr. Now it's kind of if you're going with that superstars and scrubs build, maybe Deion Waiters will play well. He'll probably play around 20 minutes.
Yeah, and if he does happen to garner any ownership, just get away. The other day I would mention a lot, like Danny Green was projected at 30% even on a 2-game slate. Anytime somebody like that is getting that type of ownership, even if they're cheap, just get away from it. And Adam, it's a similar point that you made when you're dealing with guys that are totally scoring dependent, and it's like 1 out of every 10 games that they have a decent enough game. If they're going to be chalky, I just have zero interest unless they're like somehow going to become a ball handler and start facilitating and bring the ball up the court. But it's just not going to be the case. Deion Waiters, you're right. There's one way in and one way out. You get what you get with him, and maybe he gives you a couple solid games. But 3,200, if you're talking about a dirt cheap option and you need somebody like that, you're trying to fit like LeBron and Joel Embiid and Jokic into the same lineup. Well, he's there. Do you have anything else for the Lakers?
$4,400 for low-owned Kyle Kuzma, who's playing upper 20s in minutes. Again, it's Kyle Kuzma. It's a scoring-dependent player, but the minutes have been there. He's cheap, and most importantly, he's not getting much ownership.
All right, close us out with the Utah Jazz. I don't think anyone was surprised by the fact that Donovan Mitchell let them down. I think in the opening night he was fine, but shooting-wise, man, they got crushed by OKC. He came up with 13 points in 32 minutes. Donovan Mitchell, it's unfortunate, but he's a pretty low-floor guy. Now he's $7,000 against the Lakers as a pretty big dog. And there are a decent amount of guards that you and I have already discussed that are pretty appealing at similar price points. How are you approaching somebody like Mitchell today?
Hoping I don't get nearly as much as I had last time. I still think it's a favorable price tag because in a competitive game, you're going to get like 36 minutes and he's going to be one of the highest usage guys on the team. So far through their 2 games, he's second to Jordan Clarkson with a 24% usage rate. But he's also projected to be the 7th highest owned guy or 8th highest owned guy on DraftKings right now. So it's not like you're really getting an advantage by going to him. It's not like he really works as a pivot off of, say, John Morant or DeJounte Murray at similar price points because he's owned in the same range. So unless the ownership comes down a lot, I think it's most likely that I end up just like jamming in more Morant at the expense of Mitchell. I do also have just kind of legitimate concerns about the efficiency of the Utah offense minus Bojan Bogdanovic. That's a pretty big deal in terms of someone that spaces the floor and helps open things up. Now you don't have him out there. I think that it's reasonable to actually think that this offense might really struggle consistently.
I think they will too. I also think it's reasonable to assume that Jordan Clarkson continues to operate with a rather high usage rate.
He's it's fun to watch when he's on your DFS teams, but if you're like rooting for Donovan Mitchell or for the Jazz to win, it's pretty frustrating watching Jordan Clarkson just like spin in and out of double and triple teams and then just like launch shots.
No doubt about it. They're just limited on playmakers.
Yep.
They're very limited on playmakers. So my assumption is Clarkson continues to get work. $4,900 on DraftKings. He played 32 minutes against the Pels. A lot of that, by the way, had to do with him just being red hot, and Quinn Snyder left him out there. 24 minutes against OKC. I was curious, would he have closed that game out if it was competitive?
I think so. I think
I'm pulling up Popcorn Machine right now.
Yeah, that's what I'm doing as well. I think you could see him close in competitive games or games where Utah is losing, and then see like Royce O'Neal close in games that Utah is winning. That wouldn't surprise me at all.
So none of their starters played more than like 5 or 6 minutes into the fourth quarter. I think you could be looking at a situation where Clarkson is a closer.
I think he's in the normal closing lineup. I think the exception would be if like Utah has like a 10-point lead or something.
Correct. If it's a like 2-point game where they're trailing by a couple points and you need offense, yeah, I agree with that. But yeah, Clarkson did not close out the Pels game, but he was out there until like the final 4 minutes. So his rotation looks a lot similar to that other one outside of the cut in his fourth quarter minutes in the blowout. So it's worth considering. I only mention it because he's $4,900 on DraftKings, and he's pretty cheap, $4,700 on FanDuel, and his multiplier on SuperDraft is 1.7. Finish this out for us, Adam. We've gone almost 2 hours on today's slate. What are your final thoughts on Utah and the rest of this Lakers team?
Not that it should really be an issue because you shouldn't be getting to that much Utah, but definitely would be making sure I don't have more than 2 of Ingles, O'Neal, and Clarkson in the same lineup because only 2 of them are ever closing.
All right. And our boy Sean hit us with a bunch of sizable super chats today. He asked early in the show, top 5 players on DraftKings as it stands. Who would yours be? I know it's early, but.
So I would say Jokic, Embiid, Morant, and then a bunch of guys that are similar, but Miles Turner and probably DeJounte Murray.
That's exactly the 5. That's not good. I was like, all right, well, at least he's not going to say Murray. I'll change it up there. Yeah, that's exactly it. Did you mention Mike Conley at all in that game?
I didn't. I mean, he's kind of there. You know, it's a good price point at 5,500. Guards deep with guys that are underpriced by $1,000, so it's not a price point I'm really going to be targeting that heavily. But he's probably a better guard in that price range than most others.
All right, that'll do it for us. A long one, but always great to see these numbers continue to build throughout the show. I've said it. If we keep gaining viewership throughout the show, we're going to keep it going. Appreciate you guys hanging out with us. As always, hit that thumbs up on your way out, and we'll be back. Plenty of more shows today at youtube.com/Awesemo. I'm Dave Loughran. That fella over there is Adam Scherer. And by the way, thanks to Jordan Klein for producing this one. This has been the NBA Strategy Show presented by none other than SuperDraft. We'll see you back here tomorrow on the Strategy Show.